Mr. Tintin, how do you do? My name is Professor Calculus. I understand you're off on a treasure hunt soon.
In today's episode, maybe the real treasure was the friends we made along the way. It might be, you don't know. This is Radio Tintin, Red Rackham's treasure. Previously on Radio Tintin. When last we left our intrepid heroes, Tintin discovered an antique wooden ship which turned out to be a replica of the Unicorn, a ship once captained by Captain Haddock's ancestor, Sir Francis Haddock. An excitable Haddock recounts the tale found in his ancestor's diary, how Sir Francis, after his ship is commandeered by the vicious pirate Red Rackham, manages to sink both the Unicorn and all of Red Rackham's ill-begotten treasure, presumably leaving it at the bottom of the ocean off the coast of the tropical island Sir Francis was eventually rescued from. They also discovered that Sir Francis built 3 identical models of the Unicorn and hid a scroll of parchment in each of them, which, when combined, reveal the location of the treasure. Despite the best efforts of the Bird brothers, a pair of villainous antique dealers, Tintin and Haddock find all parts of the scroll and, with their newly found coordinates, resolve to set out to sea to find Red Rackham's treasure. Or, to put it another way,
Yo-ho-ho and a bottle of rum! Red Rackham's treasure! Here we come!
Tintin and Haddock's upcoming treasure hunt is the talk of the town. As they prepare to set sail aboard the Sirius, they are contacted several times by the eccentric and hard of hearing Professor Calculus, who offers them the use of his invention, the Shark Submarine, which is a submarine shaped like a shark and not a shark shaped like a submarine. That would be ridiculous. Tintin's insistence that they don't want the Professor's submarine falls on very deaf ears, but they are joined on their voyage by detectives Thompson and Thompson, on hand to protect the crew from Max Bird, one of the villains from the previous story who is reportedly at large once more. I feel safer already. At sea, they discover that Professor Calculus has stowed away with his shark submarine in tow. Haddock is apoplectic, but the point is moot. When they arrive at the designated coordinates prescribed by the scrolls, there is no sign of the island described by Sir Francis in his account. Tintin, being a brainy boy, correctly deduces that when Sir Francis recorded his coordinates, he would have been using a French chart to calculate his position. Adjusting their coordinates to the now standard Greenwich Meridian line, they come across an island bearing irrefutable proof that Sir Francis once came ashore, including some swearing parrots, which alone would surely have made the trip worthwhile. The treasure must be nearby. Deciding to use Calculus's submarine after all, you're welcome, they are able to locate the wreck of the Unicorn and recover many historical artifacts from it, but curiously, none of Red Rackham's treasure, which is confusing for the reader because the story is called Red Rackham's treasure. Resigning to return home without their quarry, Tintin discovers from the recovered artifacts that Marlinspike Hall, the manor previously owned by the Bird brothers, was originally bequeathed by the king to none other than Sir Francis himself. And wouldn't you know it, what are the chances the estate is up for auction? Still, how on earth could our heroes possibly afford such an estate, especially since they returned from sea without the treasure? Haddock's never shown to be particularly affluent, he's been wearing that same sailor's cap for years, and Tintin barely works, and he doesn't have the advantage of living in an age where services like Patreon allow fans to support their favourite creators, patreon.com/RadioTintinPodcast. Without being asked, and for reasons not entirely obvious, Calculus offers to buy Marlinspike Hall, using the funds gained by selling the patent of his shark submarine to the government. Which government? It's not specified, but who cares, they obviously pay up front. So, all's well that ends well. Haddock gets back his family estate, and isn't that worth more than any pirate treasure? No, it isn't. Showing Haddock through the cellars he had been trapped in during the preceding story, Tintin spots a statue of St. John the Evangelist beside a globe and holding a cross, and recalls the cryptic passage from Sir Francis's scrolls. For 'tis from the light that light will dawn, and then shines forth the Eagle's Cross. Eagle's Cross? Tintin, suddenly recalling his Sunday schooling, notes that St. John was known as the Eagle. Pressing the location of Sir Francis's idol on the globe, it springs open to reveal the glowing riches of the treasure inside. It turns out Sir Francis had taken Red Rackham's treasure home with him when he was rescued from his island, and had hidden it in Haddock's ancestral home this whole time. So, to recap, a stately new home, an immense new fortune, and a very interesting new friend. Not a bad day for the Tintin family. Red Rackham's Treasure was serialised from the 19th of February 1943 until the 23rd of September 1943 in the French-language Belgian newspaper Le Soir. This was during the German occupation of Belgium during the Second World War, and Le Soir was considered a stolen or pirate newspaper, which meant that it was allowed to continue circulation with a compliant editorial board that met the approval of the occupying powers. Hergé's tenure at Le Soir meant that he would continue to have access to a large audience hungry for the escapism offered by Tintin's adventures, but he had a line to toe, and Hergé's wartime stories, with the exception of the problematic Tintin and the Shooting Star, are notable for their absence of anything resembling political commentary, minimising both censorship from his German overseers and disgust from a Belgian public ever sceptical of yet more political propaganda coming from the popular press. Assisting him in this era of storytelling was his colleague and friend, Le Soir's chief art critic, Jacques van Malkebecker. It was with Van Malkebecker's assistance that Hergé plotted the narrative of his first genuine two-parter, beginning with The Secret of the Unicorn, which concluded serialization in January 1943. Its immediate follow-up, Red Rackham's Treasure, began to appear in Le Soir the next month. In all of the wartime stories in which Van Malkebecker assisted, his influence is most evident in Red Rackham's Treasure. Treasure hunting and deep-sea exploration stories are indebted to the classic works of Robert Louis Stevenson and Jules Verne, which Van Malkebecker, unlike Hergé, was very well versed in. Similarly, this collaboration accounts for the sudden influx of Christian imagery in the story. Yes, there, look. St. John the Evangelist, who is always depicted with an eagle, and is called the Eagle of Patmos, where he wrote his Revelation. He's the eagle. In this matter-of-fact exploration, Tintin reveals a hitherto unseen knowledge of the history of the early church. Culturally Catholic, but rarely to the point of including such explicit references, Hergé no doubt owes such a reference to his well-read colleague. While Red Rackham's Treasure carries on the same storyline from The Secret of the Unicorn, it is striking just how different the two stories are in tone and setting. Unicorn is a highly concentrated domestic detective piece, with twists, turns, and lots of running back and forth between apartments as Tintin and Haddock contend with the type of unscrupulous baddies typical of the series by this stage. Only Captain Haddock's retelling of Sir Francis Haddock's sea battle provides an element of romantic escape, albeit a very strong one. Rackham, in contrast, takes place almost entirely at sea, forsaking plot for exoticism and humour. Hergé himself considered the plot of Red Rackham's Treasure to be, quote, excessively thin, and with a story that mostly follows Tintin and co sailing to a location, exploring it, before sailing on again to repeat the process, this is hard to dispute. However, if this sounds reminiscent of Tintin's earlier adventures, where he raced at breakneck speed through a series of only loosely connected scenes, it's not. Here, Hergé instead takes the time to stretch out every event and every gag in the story. In even greater contrast with those earlier stories, and even with the preceding Secret of the Unicorn, there are no antagonists to contend with in Red Rackham's Treasure. While it is announced early that Max Bird from Unicorn has escaped custody, he has no bearing whatsoever on the events of Red Rackham. His conspicuous mention serves two purposes. First, it leads the reader to expect a myriad of instances of high seas sabotage similar to those in The Shooting Star, a misdirection that pays off with the revelation that the innocuous Professor Calculus has been stowing away instead. Second, it provides a narrative justification to have Detectives Thompson and Thompson offer their protective services to the crew, with predictably hilarious results. The absence of a traditional bad guy leads to a story that is largely void of the tension and danger typically on offer. The conflict this time is between our heroes and the lost treasure itself. Indeed, the only times Tintin finds himself in mortal danger, usually an hourly occurrence for him, is when battling the elements underneath the sea. This is not a weakness of the story, however, as it gives Hergé more opportunities to lean into the strengths of Red Rackham's treasure, namely its humour and its visuals. Red Rackham's treasure is a testament to Hergé's comedic sensibilities and his ability to craft a story that is both exciting and humorous. Endless slapstick permeates each page, from Captain Haddock walking headfirst into a column bearing a poster for the Daily Reporter, motto, "For news which hits you," to Captain Haddock striking a palm tree with a pickaxe out of anger and conjuring a painful shower of coconuts. The captain gets hurt a lot in this one. Even the moments of higher tension are risible, as demonstrated by Tintin fighting off a shark with a bottle of rum, only for the shark to swallow the bottle, immediately get tipsy, and collapse in a stupor on the ocean floor. You'll recall that one of the iron laws of Hergé's universe is that alcohol will affect both animals and humans in the exact same way. Ask Snowy. On the topic of alcoholism, there is no doubt that the still fairly recent edition of Captain Haddock boosts the comedic stocks of the franchise tremendously. Tintin, as much as we love him, just isn't funny. He's too wholesome. Haddock, on the other hand, full of whiskey and righteous indignation, is very funny, and this has never been more evident than in Red Rackham's treasure. His drinking is again a point of comedy here. His reaction to being prescribed an alcohol-free diet by his doctor is priceless, as is his jumping headfirst into the ocean without a diving helmet after liberally sampling the vintage rum found in the ship's wreck. Contrasting this buffoonery, there is a strangely poignant moment in a single panel on page 32 in which the captain, lounging dreamily in a skiff after returning from Sir Francis's Island, one hand grazing the water's surface, recites a passage from Henry Wadsworth Longfellow, the 19th century American poet.
What pleasant visions haunt me as I gaze upon the sea. All the romantic legends, all my dreams come back to me.
The piece is instantly disturbed by Tintin alerting Haddock to an approaching shark, causing him to snatch his hand furiously out of the water, but it's an indication that the often drunk, always cantankerous sea dog still has the proud, seafaring spirit of adventure flowing through his veins. He remains, however, a comedic character who is at his best when he's frustrated. Perhaps Hergé realised that the level-headed Tintin just isn't frustrating enough to generate a cantankerous response from the captain. How fortuitous it is for the reader, then, that Red Rackham's treasure introduces the perfect comic foil. But more on him later. The comedic stocks of the story are further boosted by the Thompsons, their inclusion providing a perfect example of the aforementioned process of stretching out every single gag, with almost all of their involvement revolving around them cranking an oxygen pump on the ship, a recurring joke that never becomes overwrought or tiresome. Having Tintin, Haddock, Calculus, and the Thompsons confined together for a single adventure could have been overkill, but Hergé ensures that everyone has a part to play in a manner befitting their character. We'll be right back. This episode is brought to you by Tintins, the world's first Tintin-inspired canned food delivery service. Of course, Tintins isn't a real service. I'm using humour. This podcast is entirely listener supported. If you love these episodes and would like me to make more, maybe at a slightly faster pace, please consider becoming a patron at patreon.com/Radio Tintin Podcast. Patrons are charged on a per episode basis, so if I don't make anything, you don't pay anything. If you don't love these episodes and you don't want me to make any more, well, you're still listening now, so it's good for the analytics either way. Cheers. If the comedy is one highlight of the story, Hergé's artwork is undeniably another. Besides the middle sequence depicting the voyage of its titular ship, the preceding Secret of the Unicorn didn't offer much scope for exotic scenery. Its sequel, with its shipwrecks and tropical island, allows Hergé to showcase his full artistic ability. The enlarged panels in which Tintin takes to the depths with the shark submarine, or approaches the wreck of the unicorn in his diving suit, have rightly become iconic scenes within the series. The album also contains one of only 2 panels in the whole series, which Hergé would refer to as his favourites. The first panel of page 25 shows Haddock wading barefoot onto Sir Francis's island. Pipe in mouth, rifle in hand, trousers rolled to his knees, and determination in his eyes. Behind him, Tintin and the Thompsons struggle to pull their skiff ashore, while the Sirius looms behind all of them. It's a nice panel, I probably couldn't do any better, but far from the most visually striking panel in the whole album, let alone in all of the albums. However, like Hergé's only other favourite panel, in which the Bedouin raiders flee from Haddock's violent temper in The Crab with the Golden Claws, it economically conveys a sequence of events in a single static frame. Every stage of the debarking process, from the anchoring of the Sirius to the transfer to the skiff to the characters coming ashore, is depicted at once, just as the frame in Golden Claws shows every stage of the Desert Raiders running away from the captain. Considering that Hergé was clearly so proud of this technique, it does make one wonder why he didn't attempt it after Red Rackham's Treasure. So many of the smaller scenes are imbued with similar creative flair. The inclusion of a wooden idol carved by island natives depicting Sir Francis Haddock with a huge megaphone-esque mouth, representative of his predilection for profanity, is joyous to behold, as is the detail in the interior scenes of Calculus's workshop apartment and the cluttered marine shop in which Tintin purchases his diving suit. Considering the quality of this artwork, it's a shame that the Professor's trademark green coat and hat changes to a tannish brown colour for page 41 only, before reverting back. We must assume that the perfectionist Hergé, with his history of chastising his publishers for their subpar printing, was ropeable. Harry Thompson notes in general that the colours appear to be applied in, quote, slightly clumsy slabs, though he rightly praises Hergé's use of frames slightly tilted to indicate the gentle rolling of the Sirius at sea. Both the humour and the artwork compensate for a storyline that Hergé himself considered thin. More than uninspired, at the end it's almost unsatisfactory. The plot revolves around Tintin and Haddock trying to find Sir Francis's treasure at sea, before discovering it was kept in Haddock's ancestral home the whole time. That's not a bad twist. Actually, it's somewhat poignant. That which we covet is always closer than we realise. But Tintin and Haddock are only able to purchase Marlin Spike and discover the treasure therewith because it happens to be being sold at auction that very week. Awfully convenient, but whatever, it's a comic book. The money they use to purchase the estate is provided by Professor Calculus. The government has paid handsomely for the patent for his shark submarine, despite the first model in his workshop breaking as soon as he boards, and the second getting snared in a pretty innocuous patch of seaweed, almost causing Tintin to suffocate on the ocean floor. Furthermore, Calculus's decision to use the proceeds of the sale to buy Marlin Spike for his, at this stage, mere business partners, is unexpected and wholly unexplained. Do they have to pay him back? Is his living with them a condition of the purchase? Such questions are unnecessary for the young Tintin fans in 1943, simply happy to see everything working out at the end of the story, but inevitably it raises some eyebrows for the more discerning reader. After all, this resolution is effectively unrelated to the preceding events of the story. Certainly, Haddock only discovers Marlin Spike Hall as his ancestral home because Tintin discovers a chest of old documents in the wreck of the Unicorn. But remember, they didn't move into Marlin Spike with the intention of recovering the treasure. By this stage, they've effectively given up on this goal and it's just a happy accident that it happens to be in the cellar. A more satisfying resolution would have Tintin theorising that the treasure must be somewhere in Marlin Spike, and Haddock claiming legal right to the estate using the documents discovered by Tintin, after which they can find the treasure in the cellar deliberately. It is important to note, of course, that Hergé has sold about 230 million albums worldwide, and I have sold none, so let's not place that much stock in my suggestions, but it's always struck me as a clumsy muddying of what should have been a pretty simple story resolution. Ultimately, Red Rackham's Treasure is best remembered today not for its relentless comedy or its vivid illustration, but for its introduction of the final core character of the Tintin mythos, one who would quickly become as indispensable to the series canon as Captain Haddock or the Thompsons. The absent-minded professor trope was one Hergé had used several times already as a source of humour, and to provide a degree of expository expertise. Cigars of the Pharaoh featured Egyptologist Dr. Sarcophagus, King Ottokar's scepter had the ciliographer Professor Alembeck, and the shooting star had astronomers Professors Philopoulos and Fossil. Each of these characters were experts in their fields, and mentally fell anywhere on a scale from eccentric to certifiably bonkers. While each of them played prominent roles in their respective stories, they never moved beyond that single appearance. For the latest incarnation of this trope, a man who would help Tintin reach the bottom of the ocean, Hergé had a very clear inspiration. Auguste Piccard was a Swiss-Belgian physicist and inventor, famed for breaking records in exploring both the deep sea and Earth's atmosphere. Hergé had glimpsed Piccard on the streets of Brussels during the scientist's tenure at the local university in the 1930s, and was instantly struck by the sight of the towering figure adorned in an antiquated frock coat and carrying an umbrella. At the time, Piccard was a bona fide celebrity of both the European scientific community and the public at large, having become the first person to reach Earth's stratosphere in 1931 via a hydrogen balloon of his own design. Later, he would turn his scientific attention to the bottom of the ocean in the bathyscaphe, a deep-sea submersible capable of withstanding immense underwater pressure. It's an amazing coincidence that Piccard would not begin his deep-sea voyages until after the war, when Tintin had already plunged the depths in Calculus's shark submarine. With Tintin, life inspires art and then imitates it. Naturally drawn to such a character, Hergé had been collecting clippings of Piccard for some time, previously using him as a visual model for the minor character Erich Bojorgenskold in The Shooting Star, though he shares with Calculus his bohemian fashion sense, even if the quirky beret adorning Calculus in Red Rackham is sadly discarded for future adventures. Additionally, Hergé made his scientist diminutive, in stark contrast to the towering Piccard. Or else, said Hergé, I'd have to make the frame bigger. Additionally, Calculus's use of a pendulum, ostensibly to calculate the circumference of the Earth, appears to be a Hergéan addition. Calculus's repeated assertion that the treasure lies to the west is supposedly vindicated when it is eventually found beneath Marlinspike. Well, either Calculus or Hergé had their calculations wrong, as surely Marlinspike, in mainland Europe, would lie to the east of any Atlantic islands, not the west. In the original French, Calculus is named Tryphon Tournesol, Tournesol being French for sunflower, and Tryphon being the name of an absent-minded plumber Hergé once hired, though some sources say it was actually a carpenter. Sunflower is certainly an interesting choice of name for a brilliant and eccentric scientist, but Hergé's considerations for character names seem primarily that they sounded memorable, not that they were necessarily thematically accurate. I mean, what the hell is a Tintin? Whether Tournesol is better than the more thematic Cuthbert Calculus is a matter of preference. In Germany, he is Professor Balduin Bienlien translating to Little B, and continuing the alliterative motif. My dear Professor, reflected Hergé, another whom I never suspected would take on such importance. As with Captain Haddock, there is no indication that Hergé had set out to create an enduring character in the mythos, and few would have predicted that the small, quaintly dressed figure arriving at Captain Haddock's apartment unannounced, offering the use of his latest invention and deaf to all refusals, would soon come to represent an integral element of the series. Calculus is easily the best realised of all of Hergé's scientist characters, and his deafness lends itself to endless moments of comedy throughout the series. It also bestows him with a sense of indomitability. Much as the self-absorption of the diva Bianca Castafiore ensures she can never be intimidated, Calculus can never be cajoled or insulted. He will not hear the worst you have to say. Though there is one phrase used in a later adventure which, to the surprise of both the reader and the captain, causes him to fly into a rage. With no field of expertise ever firmly established, Calculus's interests would vary over the coming years, extending to topics as diverse as botany and savate, a French form of kickboxing, while his scientific inventions would range from the trivial, such as his automatic roller skates, to the groundbreaking, such as his nuclear-powered rocket, space travel being a natural extension, one might argue, of Piccard's stratospheric voyage. Despite his scientific brilliance, he is a romantic at heart, and Calculus has the distinction of being the sole character to have romantic inclinations in Hergé's sexless world, showing an affection for both the vapid Bianca Castafiore in The Castafiore Emerald, and the utterly charmless Peggy Alcazar in Tintin and the Piqueros. It's an inclination that is never demonstrated by his fellow male protagonists. Good for him. To borrow from Michael Farr's analysis of the character, Calculus's impact is threefold. First, he puts a definitive end to Hergé's search for a character that embodies the eccentric professor trope. Secondly, he allows Hergé to naturally introduce more scientific elements within the series, and several of Calculus's inventions would become crucial to future stories. Finally, he introduces a more verbal form of comedy through his constant mishearing, different from the slapstick offered by the Thompsons and the bluster of Captain Haddock. Assolini concurs, noting,
Professor Calculus embodies a gentle madness and subtle humour in the comic strips. The delirious professor never understands anything except when Tintin is in danger, then he is capable of a normal conversation. Around him, everyone tries to follow what he means and not to lose the flow of the story. The gags are assured and unforced, and not only situational, but linguistic.
Ultimately, all of this is academic. Professor Calculus is important to the canon of Tintin because he is the only Professor Calculus, and we're all richer for his introduction to the series. Perhaps less memorable, but no less important, is the consolidation of Marlinspike Hall as Haddock's ancestral home and future home base for our heroes. As with Calculus, if there's any negotiation with Tintin over living arrangements, it's never shown on page. I like to think it wasn't discussed. Naturally, Tintin will be moving in. And naturally, that strange old man that purchased the property on a whim can move in too. Leases? Rental agreements? These conversations don't occur in the Tintin universe. Let's go to South America. The move away from separate nondescript apartments to a single setting is representative of a shift in Hergé's storytelling from that of the pre-war era. Tintin started as the sole hero of the series, cast into breathtaking adventures in exotic locales in his role as a globe-trotting reporter, his only companion being the wry, fourth-wall-breaking Snowy. 14 years later, Tintin is a reporter in name only, and no longer the driving force of his own adventures. Rather, he is increasingly caught up in what happens to those around him, a family of familiar characters that is extended to Detectives Thompson and Thompson, Captain Haddock, and now Professor Calculus. To quote Benoit Peters, in Red Rackham's Treasure, Tintin deliberately abandons his, quote, childish omnipotence and accepts that others exist around him. As unorthodox of a family as this represents, it is a family nonetheless, and the move to Marlinspike represents Tintin effectively settling down. Rackham also introduces Tintin's iconic blue sweater and brown +4s over white socks, an outfit that would effectively become his uniform for all future adventures, bar the final Tintin and the Piqueros, but we don't talk about brown jeans Tintin here. 12 albums in, everything considered famous about the Tintin series seems to finally come together in Red Rackham's Treasure. It's reflective of Hergé's ever-increasing creative and professional drive. The original decision to make Tintin a reporter was largely born of Hergé's own desire to see the world. While the exotic locales of the Tintin adventures would remain a feature of the series, Hergé's primary driving force was no longer the inherent wanderlust of one who was nicknamed Curious Fox by his beloved Boy Scout troop. Tintin had become established as a superstar of the Franco-Belgian bande dessinée art form, and Hergé a primary reason that the medium would come to be known as the ninth art in Western Europe. As evidenced in Red Rackham's Treasure, Hergé's work was getting better and better, with the slapdash, frantic, gag-a-minute nature of his early work having given way to expertly paced and even more delightful stories. Just as Tintin found stability in the company of a recurring cast of lovable characters, Hergé found shelter from the turmoil and uncertainty of the German occupation by pouring himself into his art, with the Tintin adventures providing an important sense of continuity, not only for their creator, but for the Belgian public at large. Now, this is not to try and reframe Hergé's passive collaboration with the Nazis via Le Soir as a purely philanthropic venture. The counter-argument runs that he eagerly jumped into bed with the fascist regime at a time in which many of his literary peers quit or were banned from the industry. But whichever verdict you reach on that issue, there can be little denying that Hergé's creative output during the bleakest moments of the 20th century was of an unassailable quality. A fact vindicated by Farr's assertion that Red Rackham's Treasure is the best-selling Tintin album of all time, though the far inferior Tintin in the Congo and Tintin America are also cited as such by other sources. It's not for nothing that Red Rackham, along with its predecessor, were selected as the first ever Tintin stories to be translated into English, several years before publishing house Methuen published the series with the now standardised Turner and Lonsdale Cooper translations. As a side note, the English translation makes a few cultural changes. Rather than quoting American poet Henry Wadsworth Longfellow, In the original French, Haddock recites Le Lac, or The Lake, by French poet Alphonse de Lamartine when lolling in the skiff. Similarly, in the original, Haddock bumps headfirst into a column adorned with a poster advertising a film called Moi, credited 3 times to Sacha Guitry, a real-life French filmmaker renowned for writing, directing and starring in his own productions. This is changed in the English version to Me by Orson Welles, who enjoyed a similar reputation in the English-speaking world. Jean-Marc and Randy Lofficer provide the album with a perfect 5 out of 5 rating, praising the character arc afforded to each character and the beautiful artistry, while Pierre Assolini argues that the story presents Hergé's art at a new level. Acclamation isn't confined to contemporary reviewers. Hergé's friend and former colleague, Charles Lindsay, who refused to read Le Soir on ideological grounds and instead asked Hergé to send him the strips, wrote to the cartoonist,
"I've just had a good laugh, which is rare these days. I'd heard so many good things from so many sources about Red Rackham's treasure, and about your new character Calculus. It's really very good, full of unforeseen events, twists and turns, new ideas, and of course, extremely good gags. Bravo, my dear Hergé, and all my congratulations."
The story would first be adapted into the 1950s and 60s Belvision television series Hergé's Adventures of Tintin.
Hergé's Adventures of Tintin.
This series had a tendency to pad out Hergé's albums with egregious additional material, and the Red Rackham's Treasure episode is no exception. In this adaptation, Max Bird escapes prison and serves as a direct antagonist, meaning story beats in the album that are merely misdirection, leading to the reveal of Calculus aboard the Sirius in the original album, things like the food going missing and Haddock believing there's a bomb being smuggled aboard, are exactly what they seem in the episode. Max Bird actually does smuggle a bomb aboard. Fans of the album may also rack their brains trying to remember the scene where Tintin battles Max Bird on the ocean floor before hacking apart an aggressive octopus with a rusty cutlass. Yes, seriously. They might also struggle to recall the scene where Tintin battles a giant snake on a tropical island before the Thompsons are captured by head-hunting natives. They are saved when Captain Haddock impersonates Sir Francis, leading the natives to believe the wooden idol has come alive. It's a scene that's a little bit uncomfortable to watch with modern sensibilities, but it is a clever incorporation of the Sir Francis idol, an element that was in the album. The story would be adapted again for the 1990s Ellipse Nelvana series. Now, while this is much more faithful to the story, it suffers in its short length. While most of the stories in this series are adapted into 42-minute episodes, Red Rackham is one of the few albums in the series to only be afforded 21 minutes, and as a result, everything from the first meeting with Calculus to the discovery of the treasure in Marlinspike moves at a very frantic pace, with myriad gags cut to fit the runtime. This adaptation does, however, make 2 minor changes in dialogue that partially address the problems I have with the original story's resolution. First, Tintin does indeed theorise that the treasure is at Marlinspike after they learn it is Captain Haddock's ancestral home, rather than only discovering the treasure after the estate is already purchased. Secondly, Calculus explicitly mentions that he will buy Marlinspike for the captain out of gratitude for letting him test the shark submarine. It's not much, but it is something. Elements of the story were implemented into Spielberg's 2011 The Adventures of Tintin, The Secret of the Unicorn, though the film ends by setting up the actual treasure hunt for the sequel. The thing is, though, that sequel is never going to happen. I wish Tintin 2 would happen, but it's never going to happen. So we can only speculate what the Peter Jackson directed sequel would have looked like. I always thought actor Toby Jones would make a terrific Professor Calculus, but he was already cast as Aristide Silk in the first film. Sylvester McCoy, who played the 7th Doctor in BBC's Doctor Who and who had previously collaborated with Jackson in his Hobbit trilogy, was also floated as a potential Calculus. That would get a big tick from me. While there are some aspects of the story, particularly the scenes of undersea exploration, that seem particularly well suited for a big budget motion capture adaptation, there would presumably be creative liberties taken by Spielberg and Jackson. Perhaps the villainous Bird brothers, completely omitted from the first film, could be introduced as an antagonistic force in the sequel to provide a greater sense of danger to our heroes, as they do in the 1960s Belvision adaptation. All of this is speculation, and speculation it will remain. I wish Tintin 2 would happen, but it's never going to happen. Oh well, we'll always have the first film. And I guess all the albums as well, that's pretty good. Nobody can call Red Rackham's Treasure an underrated classic in the Tintin canon. It boasts some of the most iconic images in all of the albums and introduces a character that finally rounds out the central cast of characters. And it's released right in the middle of what is often considered Hergé's golden period. So even knowing all of this, I was surprised at just how fun it is to read. I really shouldn't have been, but I think the story's reputation had made me consider it non-essential reading over the years. But it really is gratifying being in the process of rereading all the albums in sequence to observe Hergé's continued improvement as a storyteller. The plot of Red Rackham's Treasure is, as we've established, it's very, very basic. So, unlike the preceding Secret of the Unicorn, there's no twists or turns or bad guys or shootouts or car chases. But the reason it works is because it's just, again, so much fun. That's just the best way I can think to describe it. If you're ever bemused at how these quaint Belgian stories about a very earnest little boy in +4s with a red quiff of hair and a little white dog became one of the most iconic series of the 20th century, read Red Rackham's Treasure. Like me, you will be delighted. The final page of Red Rackham's Treasure gives an indication to the latest state of affairs in Hergé's universe. Captain Haddock, resplendent in formal Navy attire, hosts an exhibition at his new estate, Marlin Spike Hall, showing off the masthead and the artifacts recovered from his ancestor's ship. He is established, content. The wretched soak Tintin first encountered aboard the Caribou Jeanne is a lifetime away as he proudly embraces his heritage to play his new role of landed gentry. He has a hand affectionately placed on both Professor Calculus and Tintin, a silent expression of gratitude for the people he owes so much to. Calculus for buying the whole damn house, and Tintin for everything. With this transformation of Captain Haddock, there's a case to be made that the series could actually have ended on that final page. Thank goodness it did not. Hergé had no intention of slowing down, and even if Tintin had seemingly given up journalism, he had no intention of slowing down either. Until next time, this has been Radio Tintin. Thank you for tuning in. Once again, I'd like to say a big thank you to the patrons who financially support this show, particularly the Rocket Tier patrons: Em Finan, Josh Yu, Leo, Sally W, Sam R, Yorick Incandenza, and Charlotte. Your support makes all the difference. If you're interested in supporting the show, please visit patreon.com/Radio Tintin Podcast. Tiers start at just $1 per episode, and if I don't make anything, you don't pay anything. Stay safe.